Congressman Hill, good to see you again.
Victoria, nice to see you.
You as well.
As I mentioned earlier, we're thankful for you taking the time to do this and appreciate working around a busy schedule. And so we'll jump right into some questions. And I'll actually ask the first question, as I mentioned, and then we'll hand it over to Victoria. So Congressman Hill, as a banker, tell us how you ended up on the U.S. Congressional Arts Caucus and why you chose to take that position. And in doing so, would you also tell us a little bit about what the Congressional Arts Caucus does?
Sure. Well, I'm a longtime supporter of the humanities. I've been a trustee of the Arkansas Arts Center. I was a longtime commissioner at the historic Arkansas Museum in downtown Little Rock, and very involved as the capital campaign chair to build that new museum that we have down at the historic Arkansas Museum. And it all dates back to time in college when I was a history minor and an art history person inside of that history minor. So I've loved the humanities all my life. So it's not unusual that I have an interest in art. Mm-hmm. And grateful for the opportunity to be on the Congressional Art Caucus. It's about 40 years old, Chris, and it's given the opportunity for high school students all over the nation to compete and display their art. It's one-dimensional art. It's not sculpture, but it can be in any medium. And it is amazing to see what our high school students create. And if they are selected from each of the congressional districts, they hang there in the Capitol hallway between the Cannon Building and the U.S. Capitol for all the public to see. We have millions of people who pass through there in a normal non-pandemic year. And this past Congress, I've been the co-chairman of the Congressional Art Contest. So it's been a terrific tradition and so successful with our high school students that we started about 5 years ago, the Congressional App Challenge, which allows students to use their creativity and programming. And the Innovation Hub has been our place to unveil those student success stories in the 2nd District.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm gonna hand it over to Victoria, but before I do, I have one quick question for you. What are you a really good artist?
Good question. So I am a very amateur dabbler watercolor.
Okay.
I do a lot of landscapes, and I do some from photographs, and I'll do some plein air, hanging out by something beautiful. And
Great.
It's very relaxing, but I have not reached the skill of George W. Bush in portraiture that he has from a sportsaholic, baseball fanatic governor president to really being quite amazing what he's accomplished in recognizing particularly our veterans with his portraiture art.
Good stuff. Now you're gonna get some tough questions from Victoria.
I'm ready.
Yes. And just to transition, so the first question is, nonprofit organizations and self-employed people make up the majority of the creative economy and the arts. So we are grateful for the vision to include them in the CARES Act relief package. So do you expect or think the next round of relief packages will continue to support nonprofits and self-employed?
I do, and you're right. For the first time ever in American history, sole proprietors, self-employed people, and even gig workers, people who work in the new gig economy, all were covered by the unemployment compensation system and made eligible for things like paycheck protection. Right. Huge opportunity for that self-employed sector of our economy. And also we've tried to urge, and it's been somewhat successful, to expand PPP to nonprofits. And then in the Main Street program, which is a Federal Reserve lending program through the banks, they have expanded for large nonprofits to give them access to those Main Street funds. So I think when we come ashore on another pandemic-related economic recovery package, that they will be covered in there. The details of which are still all obviously open to discussion, but I'm confident they will, because that was the theme, in the CARES Act.
Mm-hmm. And then also it's just great to know that that's part of the conversation. So that's good moving forward. So with the pre-pandemic arts and cultural production in Arkansas was valued at $2.9 billion. That sector alone creates over 34,000 jobs. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. So with arts impacting other industries such as tourism, what are your ideas on how to support the arts and creatives?
Well, I think a lot of that is something that could be dealt with at the state level. You know, at the federal level through the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, we work to create flexibility and expand that flexibility so that that small amount of federal dollars can go help leverage those important local charitable contributors, right? That's a huge part of our arts community, is just helping our charities survive, and our nonprofit donors and philanthropists really support the arts and the humanities. So those dollars help. And then the state thinking about it as a strategy. And I know that Parks and Tourism, which has part of the Arkansas Department of Heritage, all under Secretary Stacey Hurst, that's something to be thinking about. And the reason why I say it is we're making a major commitment here in Little Rock with philanthropy dollars, plus city tax dollars, plus state dollars to completely rebuild our Arkansas Arts Center complex here, which is a teaching place and a place of inspiration and cultural enrichment. And then look at what the Waltons have done in Northwest Arkansas with the investment in Crystal Bridges and all the spin-off arts and humanities enrichment that surround that. So up a good point that it's a strategic opportunity for the state, and we can think about that in promotion dollars. We can think about that in humanities leverage dollars. But I do think it's an important strategy for every state. But we're blessed here in Arkansas with two hubs that are particularly robust. And I'm not discounting other places in the state, but Northwest Arkansas and Central Arkansas have a robust art, humanity, and music and education awareness and support system.
Great point. I love the hubs, for example, especially with my current job and just partnering with those. So with the pandemic at play now, we have learned that we cannot predict the future, but we can be prepared to think outside of the box and be able to pivot. It also teaches us the importance of the creative economy and making sure we have a pipeline of talent trained and ready to contribute to the creative economy. So as we are turning more and more to the internet for daily shopping, entertainment, and education, we should take note that every photo, video, and sound that goes into each product involves a creative thinker. Arts education teaches these artistic skills as well as creative problem solving and flexibility. So Congressman, what are your thoughts on the importance of arts education? And how do we invest in arts education when the arts are one of the first items cut when economic hardship hits?
Well, as we learned through when Mike Huckabee was our governor, he put a preeminent leadership as governor on arts education in our schools, both music education and the visual arts. And he knows that that's directly tied with student performance. Students that are involved in the arts, both music and the visual arts, have higher grade points, they have higher engagement, and it's part of that connecting your brain, left and right sides of your brain, and making you a more successful thinker, in my view. So I support arts education. And again, we have to engage the leverageability of both state dollars, federal dollars, and also remind superintendents and school boards that this is an important thing. And there are a lot of ways to skin the cat. You don't have to have heavily structured approaches that depend only on a paid teacher. You have museums, you have nonprofit groups, you have lots of people that can do arts enrichment at our school level and help deliver that product, if a school district can't particularly afford that effort. But in our district, I'm always impressed with the number of art visual things that are introduced to our competition from Bologna High School. It is an epicenter of visual arts in my district. So I know a lot of our art teachers are great around the 2nd Congressional District of Arkansas. I also am on the the STEM caucus for math and science, which Chris, I work a lot with students that are using the innovation of, but I'm also on the STEAM caucus, which includes the word art. And the historically Black colleges and universities have now made that a core focus for all of their campuses to make sure that they're adding the arts into STEM. Because right now our HBCUs produce about 1/3 of all African-American engineers and people in the health professions out there in the American economy. And they want to make sure that they also address the arts. I'll say in the pandemic, one other thing that's challenging is when you look at all the Department of Education opening guidelines and all the protections for our parents, our students, and our faculties in order to open safely and then operate merged, right? We're doing some virtual, some in classroom. We need to make sure that the arts are handled because it's not all one size fits all. I've seen a lot of bands coping pretty effectively. I've been to a lot of high school football games this fall, and I was at the UCA game last weekend, and I watched how they did their music and how they did the band, how the band instruments were prepared, how the social distancing was done. Pretty impressive. But if you're thinking about teaching dance, for example, in the room that you're going to teach dance in, and do they have the right planning and procedures? So I hope that Johnny Key and our commissioners are thinking about the arts when they're thinking about these virtual versus in-class teaching preparation. So that's not something I can do much about. I mean, I've mentioned it to Johnny Key, but I do think that we sometimes are so focused on getting the history class taught and the math class taught that we don't recognize that sometime in our visual arts, our hands-on teaching, or in music or in dance, that we've got to take some other parameters in order to handle the pandemic.
Right.
So before Victoria asks the next question, I love the excitement and energy in your responses. And I also know that you're on a tight timeline. So we're going to make sure we lean into being a little bit shorter on the answers.
I'll try to be short in my responses.
Yes. Okay, so for Nexus, beyond traditional arts education, how do you think we should approach developing and retaining more homegrown talent? And how do we support our up-and-coming young creative professionals?
Well, I think the secret there, again, is the nonprofit community and our core art institutions. But we have terrific opportunities for apprenticeship and training. I know we've had incredible curators that have come out of Museum Science School who work at the Historic Arkansas Museum. You've seen the Thea Foundation do a lot of support for arts in the classroom. So at the heart of that, I think, is our cultural institutions and their nonprofit supporters reaching out more broadly to both teachers and students.
Okay, and for Arkansans for the Arts, we consider diversity as a cornerstone for the creative economy. We're glad to see the topic getting the attention it deserves throughout the state. So what are your thoughts on how to support and increase diversity in the arts?
Well, again, it takes intentional work to do that. And our best place to start are where one finds diversity, which is across our school system, and encouraging people there, talking about apprenticeships, talking about engagement, and our cultural institutions should be standing at the forefront of that.
Got it. That's very important. Every district in Arkansas has a major economic development initiative to revitalize downtown districts and or blighted areas. Creative placemaking through the arts is at the center of these revitalization projects. So for example, think of Fort Smith's 64.6 downtown, El Dorado's MAD, and the new Pine Bluff multi-use project by the Arts and Science Center. So what role can the state or federal government play to positively leverage the arts in revitalizing American cities, or Arkansas cities in essence?
Yeah, well, I love what the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute does on Pedigene and working with cities to help encourage indigenous growth and creativity. And I've seen it in almost every city I represent, from what's going on in Clinton recently to in Benton. obviously Searcy is, you know, all these towns are creating an art scene, a entrepreneurship class, and that attracts young people back to their town, gives a focus to youth in their communities. And this is such a challenge for so many towns in Arkansas, particularly those, the more rural oriented they are. So that's exciting. I mean, even in Morrilton, the redo of the Coca-Cola bottling building, and I hope it gets a National Historic Preservation Award, has created a new energy there. So you're right, and I think CDBG funds is a great way for cities to use money in that regard. And again, these humanities grants can be done with cities and city partnerships as they attempt to enliven an arts scene in their local areas.
Exactly. Okay, so Arkansas is attracting the attention of creative industries and creative professionals. So for example, the digital production industry with projects like True Detective, that project brought thousands of creative people together, made millions of dollars for the state, and spurred additional projects to be produced in Arkansas. Creative people need to be around other creative thinkers in creative places. So what are your ideas on how to make Arkansas a state that draws creative industry here and entices creative professionals to stay?
Well, again, I think a great place to start would be asking the governor to work with Stacey Hurst in the rubric of promotion of our cultural institutions, plus Mike Preston at the Arkansas Economic Development Commission, and then our film commission, and work together. You know, these film commissions around the United States are looking, this is just a general statement. A lot of them are looking at yesterday's problem. So a very common thing to do, the reason why you see a big scene in movies in Georgia is they have the largest tax rebate. So they bought that production, and I can't remember what it was. It got way up over 25 cents on the dollar. It may have gotten closer to 30 cents on the dollar. So having a competitive reimbursement for expenses invested in a project is how movie industry moved around the country. And Arkansas's ebbed and flowed there. I would say we're competitive, but not at the top. And we've had some good films made here. But let's think futuristically. Let's take that same concept and look at now digital production that you referenced. You used True Detective as an example. That brings up a whole nother way of production and opportunity for designers, graphic artists, the acting aspects of it, the audio mix. And so I would say tourism, economic development, and the film commission ought to be thinking now digitally and digital production in addition to that classic normal motion picture activity, and see if we can expand our digital advertising and motion picture opportunity that way and see what it takes to be competitive. And that's something the state needs to think about.
Right. Exactly. And like True Detective, that was just one of the productions that put Arkansas on the map as a sought after production location. So with that thought in mind, several studios have reopened or relocated, have opened or relocated to Arkansas over the past 3 years. And Arkansas is on the verge of becoming a major exporter of creative content. So what are your ideas on how to grow the film, music, and digital production industries in Arkansas?
Well, I think I answered that question in my previous answer. I think that's the right kind of way to build that strategy and build the financial and economic development incentives around that. And I look forward to seeing those results. And thanks for advocating for it.
Yes, absolutely. And then finally, so considering the direct and indirect economic impact that the arts provide by attracting talent, creating jobs, greatly enhancing our quality of life, and raising the profile of Arkansas, do you think the arts should play a larger role in shaping economic development policy? For example, should the arts be designated as a sector on the Arkansas Economic Development Commission?
Well, I think when you see the success of the investments that are being made by the private sector and also by the public sector in the Arkansas Art Center and the impact of the Clinton Presidential Library here, and the art scene generally, the entrepreneurial art scene here, and then you look at the same in Bentonville from the impact of Crystal Bridges' cultural enrichment. It's clearly a strategy, and it goes back to the point I made about Mike Preston and Stacey Hurst thinking about that as a recruitment aspect for how Arkansas positions itself, both in its advertising and in its economic outreach.
Exactly.
Good stuff. So thank you for responding to those questions. It was really engaging. I have one last question for you, and it'll be quick. So in the theme of this year's Arts Advocacy Day is arts means. And we're hearing from people around the state sharing what arts means to them. We can sum up this interview with the phrase, arts means business. What does arts mean to you?
Well, arts means to me enrichment. Enrichment. You know, all of my engagement in visual art or musical art, and this goes back to when mankind began to make music and make visual art. It's about enrichment of the person, making you a better person. And of course, there's a storytelling aspect of it that's so incredible in all the arts. But for me, it's that sense of personal enrichment. I'm a better person because of the arts.
Great. Well, we appreciate your time. We know you're busy. We thank you for sharing with us, and continue to advocate for the arts on behalf of Arkansas.
Gloria, thank you. And this has been a lot of fun, and my best wishes. And thanks for being a great voice for the arts in Arkansas.